Mr. Abenante, yield for just a minute.
Mr. Abernathy, will you yield?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Abernathy yields.
Mr.
Mr.
Abenante,
McLaughlin?
a few minutes ago you talked about the fact that it would be much better if somebody picked up a chair and threw it or beat up their spouse in another way. I just wanted to...
I was not supporting domestic violence.
No, I know you're not, but you said that that would be better. I would expect that you would think that the FBI is, in fact, a valuable source of information, correct?
On some occasions.
Okay, so the statistics show for the FBI, just to inform you and the rest of the body, that in 2012 there were a total, this is nationwide, of 625 murders committed with rifles and shotguns.
And none with chairs, right?
You know, well, let me just finish. The total number of deaths committed with fists, hammers, and other blunt objects, I think a chair would be considered a blunt object if used in a moment of anger, was 1,196. That breaks down to 518 murders related to hammers and blunt objects and 678 related to fists, 100% higher than rifles and shotguns.
I believe this legislation is designed to remove the 500 you're talking about. You and I can get together to deal with the other 1,000 in another way.
Yeah, and you don't think that that's going to contribute to an even higher number? If somebody's acting in anger, they're going to act in anger no matter what's in front of them. I just wanted to point that out, that that's a completely uninformed statement to say that it's less dangerous in this point. The statistics just don't bear that out. Thank you, Mr. Abenante. Would Ms. Paulin yield?
Mr. Paulin, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Amy.
Ms. Paulin yields.
Is this law in effect in New York City right now?
Yes.
It is.
Not exactly in the same form.
Okay.
Because, you know, in counties, they don't have the ability to set certain levels of penalty.
Ms. Paulin, please speak into
Yeah.
the mic. The rest of
Yeah.
he can hear you. Everybody else needs to hear you.
New York City and Westchester have very similar law to this, but they can they cannot implement a law that rises to a certain level of penalty. So the highest they can go is in effect what we would consider a misdemeanor A. So that's
okay.
the difference. Yeah.
So the difference is in the penalty phase, not so much in the law itself or the prevention aspects, as you stated. It's in how high they can go. So in Westchester, this is just a Class A misdemeanor. That's as high as they can go?
Yes.
Okay. Then, but yet the law in itself is in effect. So you would contend, I would think, that the deterrent aspect of the law is still in effect, or the safety aspect of the law is still in effect, since in New York City it is in effect, right?
Yes.
Okay. Then how do we explain 45% increase in shootings this year in New York City? Almost overwhelmingly, by the way, with illegal, not legal handguns. But if this law works and prevents these things from happening, how do you explain a 45% increase? Because we don't have the law in place up here, and we don't have a 45% increase in shooting.
You know, it's there's a lot of reasons for all of those crimes, and I've heard on this floor many times, you know, all of those reasons offered in various ways. So, you know, this, I would argue, prevents some, and those numbers would likely be higher if that law didn't, wasn't in place in New York City.
You understand, the statistics show, and certainly we can all pick statistics to make our argument, but 95% of the crimes committed with handguns are committed with illegal handguns. Would we not be much more of a deterrent force if we severely increase the penalties for crimes committed with illegal handguns, rather than making criminals of legal handgun owners or firearm owners?
I have been the sponsor of such bills. It's not, one law does not mean that another law is inappropriate to prevent crime. Whether one is more appropriate than another, I would argue that you need a whole lot of different kinds of laws, as we have now in our penal code, to deter and prevent crimes.
And which would you say would be the bigger issue in New York State right now?
Well,
gun violence or abuse of prescription drugs?
This debate is about safe storage,
right.
So I find that question almost, irrelevant.
No, relevant in this case. There is a lot more crime and a lot more murder and a lot more mayhem connected to prescription drug abuse. Would it not make more sense to require people to lock up their prescription drugs than to lock up their legally owned firearms?
I don't have any data on what unlocked prescription drugs causes. We do have data that shows, and we know that unlocked guns are a huge problem, particularly for teenage suicide and for young people who find guns who use them on other young people. So, while that might be an interesting bill to put forward, we know that the bill in front of us addresses a deep concern that we have here.
And you spoke with another colleague about the theft of a firearm and how the owner of that firearm that was stolen sets himself up for a Class E felony, correct, if they report it?
If that person had put a trigger lock on, had locked it in a safe box, had followed the law, and then they would not be subjected to a Class E felony.
How would you ever know that the person did any of that? If the person broke in and stole the gun and got the trigger lock off, how would you know that happened?
Mr. Sepulveda, why do you rise?
I have a question. Are you aware that the states with the loosest gun control laws
I
have the
didn't
highest...
yield yet.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that's right.
Okay. We will yield for a question.
Good point. Mr. McLaughlin, will you yield?
I will yield.
Just for 1 second.
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware...
Can Amy answer a question, but don't sit down?
All right,
Can Amy
sure.
answer a question for just a second? Yes. Now I forgot. Somebody. Yeah, how would they know that the person complied with this law if this law becomes law? How would they know? Maybe the person that stole the gun obviously stole it for a reason, and it wasn't to walk around with it with a trigger lock on it. So how would we know?
And I would flip that on you, because obviously the person who had the gun stolen would worry about being possibly accused of a felony E. I would say that how would someone not know?
No.
So if they would say, it's almost, if it's in their home, they could say, for example, it wasn't a lockbox, it was stolen anyway. There was a trigger lock, it was stolen with the trigger lock. So, I would suggest that, it could easily be turned the other way.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, Amy, that if it was stolen and then it was used in the commission of a crime, obviously that trigger lock had been removed. Sorry, Louis. Obviously that trigger lock had been removed, and therefore is that person not potentially liable for a Class E felony?
They are not.
How? I mean, I'm just asking how you know.
If there had been a trigger lock on that gun, then they would have been following the law. They would not be open to the Class E felony.
Even though the trigger lock is long gone.
Even though the trigger lock is long gone, if they had a trigger lock on the gun, they would be following the law.
And the burden of proof would not be on the owner of that gun, who no longer possesses that gun, to prove that there was a trigger lock there?
How would they prove it?
Exactly. How would they prove it? But it doesn't mean they're not going to get charged. Thank you, Amy. Louis, thank you. I will yield.
Mr. Sepulveda,
are you aware that the states with the loosest gun control laws are the highest rate of homicides and crimes involving guns, both legal and illegal?
Well, which would that be? Vermont? They have exceptionally loose gun laws. Basically, if you can fog a mirror, you can get a gun over there. And their gun crimes are exceptionally low.
Your position was that, in fact, if you have looser gun control laws, you have less crime. Are you also aware that there's absolutely no empirical data or any study that I could find that says that if you have stricter laws and you incarcerate people more for gun violence, that it makes us safer?
Wait, let me just step back for a second.
Yeah.
My position is, in fact, that Vermont has exceptionally loose gun laws, which I would say they're a pretty free state, and we're the least free state in the nation. They have exceptionally low amount of gun crime. And there are a lot of people armed over there. And I know the argument is there's not many people over there, but those that are there are not shooting each other. Your next question was about?
That you indicated that prescription drugs cause more deaths and crime in the state than gun laws. But in fact, are you aware that there's absolutely no empirical data to suggest that if you incarcerate people more that use illegal guns, that in fact it makes us safer?
If you incarcerate people more for using illegal guns?
That's correct. You're
How
saying
would
you
that?
said that we should have stricter laws that
Yeah.
incarcerate people that use illegal gun laws.
Yeah.
But there's no data or anything to suggest that you're correct.
Well, then why incarcerate anybody?
Oh, that's
Ryan,
we can
what?
argue that all day if
Yeah,
you
but
like.
if you,
Absolutely.
are you arguing that somebody that commits a violent crime with a gun
No, I'm
should
saying that
not have the book thrown at them?
Your argument that the use of prescription drugs is a greater problem in this state than gun laws or the
Clearly.
use of illegal gun laws, and that
Clearly.
you should incarcerate people at a greater rate if they use guns illegally, to suggest that in fact it would make us safer, and the reality is that it doesn't make us safer.
You don't think it would make you safer to take criminals off the streets that committed crimes, violent crimes with guns?
No, because when people use guns, they don't think, am I going to go to prison or not? So the reality is that,
So you mean they don't obey the gun law?
well, what I'm saying is it doesn't make us safer, your argument.
So you're saying that they don't obey the gun laws?
Well, they obviously don't obey
Exactly.
the use of illegal guns. It doesn't make us safer if you have tougher laws for people like that.
Well, it sure as heck makes us safer from that person that committed that crime, because that person's now gone. And I would contend that many people in this body have prevented stricter sentences for those that use guns illegally, and therefore we may never get that empirical data. But I'd be willing to take the chance if we increase the penalties for illegal gun use. I would say you'd make this place safer. That'd be my
But I
contention.
suggest to you that the data doesn't suggest that in any way, fashion, or form. But thank you.
Thank you.
All right.